Final Fantasy XIV is a massive game with thousands of hours of content. What I'm going to do here is break down some of the major plot points for those of you who want to know more about Eorzea, but may not have time to experience it all firsthand. Today, we're tackling the first part of the Eden's Gate storyline from Shadowbringers. After beating Hades and destroying the light that corrupted the first, Rean and Thancred head into the Empty, the land that had been wiped out by the flood before Minfilia could halt its advance. With a balanced return to darkness and light, Rean has begun sensing a massive concentration of light. Not knowing what it is, she comes to get you just in case as a light warden. You, Rean, Thancred, and Urianger hop into the Sky Slipper and head out into the Empty to discover just what is causing it. Staying in the Empty for too long can cause you to turn into a Sin Eater, so the investigation will be done in parts. Your group rides for a long time before finally finding what Rean had sensed, a Sin Eater. An incredibly large Sin Eater that's made entirely of light. The very first Sin Eater. Urianger had been trying to find out where the flood had come from, and he figured that it came from a single being. That thing is what Rean had sensed in the same monster that Minfilia had fought a century ago. But with the creature still being alive, it can undo all of the work that you and Minfilia have done to save the first. Urianger, however, believes that it can be used to restore the first. Rean names it Eden, and Thancred decides to set up camp so you can get ready to study the first Sin Eater. He heads off to scout the area, and when he returns, you plan your next move. Rean thinks that what the Flood of Light had done was stop the flow of ether to everything in its path, but the ether wasn't destroyed, only made dormant. If Eden was able to stop the flow, then maybe it could be used to start it back up again, and Rean thinks that she can control it. Thancred is skeptical of the possibility of Rean being able to control that level of power. Urianger, however, doesn't believe that it is as far-fetched a plan as one might think. He's come to the conclusion that Minfilia stopped the Flood of Light's advance by putting Eden to sleep instead of destroying it for just the purpose that Rean suggests, but it will still be dangerous. Rean wants to try it anyway. She's been studying Eden since you arrived, and it seems like the light is concentrated at its core. If her guess is right, then she can use its core to restore the etheric balance. Urianger proposes that by using Ethernet shards as beacons, you could trace the ether flow to Eden's core and secure a means of teleportation into and out of the beast. But before you can do that, Rean has to study the Sin Eater's interior so you could chart a safe path. Once there, Urianger will set up a means of communication and hopefully control of the creature. Thancred points out that it is unlikely that Eden will enjoy having you, quote, rummaging around in his innards. He probably should have came up with a better way to say that, so he recommends that you lead the way. Rean doesn't want to put you in danger, but with you being the only one who can safely take down light wardens, there isn't much choice. There is indeed a defense system in place, and huge amounts of ether rush to the core when you arrive, taking on the form of a smaller version of Eden. After surviving some attacks that definitely should have killed you, like being shot with an energy beam that literally takes you into another galaxy, you bring down the Guardian. Rean is pleased to see that you didn't absorb any light with your victory, and with the path being clear, you can use Ethernet shards to teleport into the core. True to his word, Urianger sets up a device so Rean can communicate with Eden, and she jumps right into it. The Sin Eater resists, but Rean fights with it and gains control, even though it did rise into the air and try to fly off. Since there's no rest for the weary, not long after Rean gains control, a whole lot of somethings invade Eden. Thancred and Urianger head off to deal with the enemies on the inside while you head to the top to fight the big boss, as usual. Eden can manipulate ether to make simple structures, so Rean uses it to make something for you to stand on during your battle. Unfortunately, it can't make any weapons to stop you from having to fight at all, but you have to use what you can get. The attacker is a flying beast holding a warrior in a suit of armor. It's an odd fight filled with strange creatures, but you win, as usual. Thancred and the others meet you up top and inform you that the things that they fought were unlike anything that they'd seen on the first. Before they can say more, the armored warrior gets up and shouts about how she won't let you do something before she clutches her head in pain and passes out. Rean checks to see if she's alive and discovers that she is, but her ether is very strange. Whoever she is, she seemed angered by Rean taking control of Eden. She's not a Sin Eater, but she is very powerful. She could be a dangerous enemy, but she could also hold useful knowledge about Eden. Thancred decides to continue his role as a babysitter by keeping an eye on the girl until she wakes up. But he's not going to bring her to the core since he's pretty sure that was where she wanted to go in the first place. Instead, he takes her to your camp. Meanwhile, you, Reen, and Urianger return to Eden's core, where he tells you what you should already know. The creatures that the girl was summoning were void sent. Reen couldn't sense any light from her, and she reminds her of Emmett Selk, although she's not an Ascian. In any case, there's not much more they can figure out about the girl until she wakes, so Reen returns her attention to improving her control of Eden before the next surprise shows up. With her new knowledge, she now understands what the flood of light was. It unbalanced the ether of the land, making it lean heavily toward the umbral element and stopped it from flowing at all. But since the stagnant ether wasn't destroyed, then it could be made to flow again. Eden has the power to control the balance of ether over a large area, forcing it from one state to another. Reen thinks that she can use it to fix what was done, but she doesn't know where to start. Urianger has a plan, but he'd rather not say it without Thancred present, so you all head back to camp to meet up with him. The Empty is a vast place, so if you only change a single area at a time, it will take forever to restore. Urianger proposes restoring each element in order to enact a widespread change. Reen is unclear whether or not Eden can draw out elements one at a time, so Urianger thinks that you should all go to locations that strongly represent the element that you want to restore to help focus Eden's power. All you need to do is draw out the ether, rebalance it, and return it to the land. However, it is possible for the ether to spread out of control, causing a flood of a different type, say a flood of fire or water as opposed to light, which would be just as devastating to the land as what you're already trying to fix. To prevent this, the element must be focused into something, a physical manifestation of each element, so to speak. Sound familiar? If it doesn't, then you probably haven't gotten too far in the game because you spent almost the entirety of A Realm Reborn fighting just that. Primals. Urianger intends to use your memories combined with Eden's power to summon primals that you can defeat, dispersing their ether back to the land. Should be easy since they pretty much will be repeats of fights you've already done. To start things off, Urianger thinks you should do water, the source of life. The world's deepest ocean once existed west of Norront, but the flood evaporated it. Seems like the best place to try and summon a water god. Thancred stays behind to watch over the unconscious girl while you head off. It works. Using your memories, Reen summons Leviathan. Pretty sure you notice that he looks a little bit different than he used to. But different or not, you take him down just like before. Reen, having never seen a primal before, is amazed, but she's confused when you tell her that it wasn't the same as the original. Urianger thinks that since Leviathan of the Source was believed to be a god by the Sahagin who summoned it, he looked different when he was summoned by you. I think the Warrior Light's been in so many fights that he's gotten a bit of brain damage, but that's only a guess. It could explain why he doesn't talk all that much. In any case, you all step outside to see if your plan worked. Beating Leviathan caused a lake to appear. Now that they know that the plan is a good one, the next element that should be restored is earth, so plants will be able to grow. Reen is eager to keep moving, but she's curious about the unconscious girl. Thancred removed her helmet and was surprised to see that the girl was nothing like a normal void scent. She looks to be a normal girl, no older than Reen. Since she's still asleep, Thancred opts to stay with her so he can question her when she wakes up, while you get back to what you're doing. The time has come for the return of one of your worst nightmares from days gone. Titan. Now I can forgive Leviathan's change in appearance. You fought the head and the tail at the same time before, so thinking that it had two heads is plausible. But in what world did Titan go from looking like a Goron from Zelda to a bodybuilding transformer that tries to run you over with a four-wheeler? The Warrior Light has definitely got brain damage. In any case, you take down the new and improved Titan, and when you step outside, the entire landscape is changed. The lands further out from where you are still seem unchanged, but Urianger believes that the reason has something to do with an intersection of ethereal currents in the area, which means that other areas linked to the one you're in should experience a change eventually. Reen's excitement is short-lived though when she collapses in exhaustion. She tries to shrug it off as nothing, but Thancred thinks she needs to rest. Urianger agrees, but Reen still argues until he reminds her that staying in the Empty is still dangerous. She admits that she does feel weird and she decides to leave the Empty for a bit. Urianger plans to stay for a while, studying what you've done. Before she leaves, he urges her not to discuss what she's done in the Empty with anyone. Not yet. Reen doesn't want to make a habit of keeping secrets from her friends, a habit that Urianger needs to break, I think. But she'll do as he asks. Thancred thinks the unconscious girl will do well somewhere else as well and wants you to talk to your allies in Mortsuk so they can find a place for her. He tells you to get some rest as well, so you head off with Reen, something she's thankful for when she remembers just how long the ride across the empty had been. She wants you to meet her contact from the Crystarium, but first she wants to talk to you about something in a bit of a safer place. She's worried about the girl that had attacked you. She wants to talk to her, but she hasn't forgotten how she tried to kill you. If she's wrong and leaving the girl alive ruins what you're working for, then it will be her fault for not acting. You calm her down, telling her that everyone deserves a chance, and if things go wrong, you'll deal with them. But you can't panic before there's actually a reason to. With her fears dealt with, she takes you to meet with Luri, who's been helping with the expedition. She sends you off to rest after the meeting while she gives a report of what's happened so far in the empty. Meanwhile, Urianger has a theory that he's discussing with Thancred, one that he wants to keep secret from you and Reen until he knows more. He believes that while Reen is the Oracle of Light, the girl that attacked you is her opposite, the Oracle of Darkness. Yalford, one of the members of Reen's team on the Eden Project, has been looking for you because the girl you brought back from the empty finally woke up. Reen and Urianger show up, already having heard the news from Thancred, and both are eager to find out more about the mysterious girl who tried to kill you. Her name's Gaia, and she claimed to be from Yulmore, but that's all she seems to remember. So Thancred took her home to see if anyone there recognizes her. They should have been back already though, so something must have happened. Well, something did, but it wasn't what you'd think. Thancred wasn't delayed by a Sin Eater attack or anything else that makes sense. Nope. He's just been struggling to carry all of Gaia's luggage from home. Her neighbors barely knew her, and other than seeing her house, they didn't learn anything on the trip. She didn't even remember much about her own life in the city. However, she thinks she'll get her memory back if she hangs around you guys, so she invited herself along and made Thancred carry all of her stuff. I personally would have tossed her luggage into the land of the Pixies because of how rude the girl is and let her spend the next decade trapped in one of their games, but Thancred's a bit nicer than I am. Since the conversation is dragging on, you all find a spot to sit down at Gaia's rude request, and Reen starts questioning her about her amnesia. The fact that her memory loss is so random makes it seem suspicious, but Thancred trusts her for some reason. Since he wants her to trust you all as well, he let her know about what you were doing in the empty with Eden. However, he still wants you to be on guard just in case you need to introduce her to your weapons. Gaia doesn't remember the fight, but she does recognize your face. Still, she feels like all of this was destined to happen based off of what the voice inside of her head, something she calls the fairy, told her. That's not crazy at all. Nope. It's perfectly normal to name your imaginary friends. She says it even lets her use its powers, and that's where her magic comes from. Considering how this power let her summon Void Scent from the 13th Shard, I'm getting serious Arya vibes from the Red Mage story, but on a far grander scale. I say that because summoning Void Scent on the Source, the main world where you come from, is difficult. It is far more difficult to do it on the first. Urianger tries to explain this to Gaia in his usual way, and she has no idea what his unique speech patterns means, and trying to figure them out is giving her a headache. Reen understands the whole having a voice inside of her head since she lived with Minfilia in her mind for most of her life. She thinks Gaia may be dealing with something similar, and Urianger agrees, telling her his theory about Gaia being the Oracle of Darkness. Thancred thinks she shows some symptoms of Ascian possession, something he has personal experience with, but the difference between what Thancred experienced and what Gaia is going through is the fact that she never lost control of her body, and she still has some memories even after hearing the voices, so it has to be something else, because if an Ascian had taken her body, she would have no control at all. So it's probably something closer to the way that Reen was partially possessed by Minfilia. Urianger even thinks that Gaia's goth appearance may come from the possession, the same way Reen used to look more like Minfilia. Gaia shatters that theory because not only was she born with her dark hair, her parents both had the same, or she thinks, but she hasn't seen them in a long time. They had been taken for ascension by Valkyrie, which means they were turned into Sin Eaters. Changing the subject, she wants to know how Reen ended up going from being locked up in Yulmore to hanging out with the Warrior of Darkness. It is a story that Reen is very eager to tell. Bits of it Gaia remembers because she was in Yulmore when Valkyrie made the people attack you. Although she was unaffected by his control, something Thancred attributes to the fairy that Gaia spoke of, the creature may be the reason why Gaia appeared and attacked you when Eden lifted off. Since she doubts she'll learn more from talking to you, Gaia hops up and decides to head back to Eden. Since the fairy wanted it, going there may let her learn what's been living in her head for all of those years. So she leaves, forcing you to track her down. It's not hard to follow the footprints of someone wearing heels through the desert, and you spot her getting attacked by a monster. She casts a wicked-looking spell at it, and makes it blow up from the inside. Ever since she was little, the fairy had whispered to her, telling her what to do and letting her use its powers. But even now, she still doesn't understand it, and sometimes things happen without her doing it, like weird armor and weapons appearing or portals opening to let monsters out. The power feels more like someone is channeling it through her and not being used by her at all. But she's never really tried to control it either, since she doesn't make a habit of fighting monsters. But she better get used to it if she plans on traveling with you all to Eden, although Thancred doesn't think it's a good idea, especially if it makes her lose control and decide to attack you. Urianger agrees with him that they should keep Gaia isolated and under guard while you continue your work. It's not like your mission to use Eden to restore the first is easy anyway, and adding another potential problem to the equation isn't all that smart. Reen counters, claiming that it wasn't that long ago that she was isolated and held against her will for what people claimed was the greater good, and if that's what Thancred thinks they should do, then he's no better than Valtteri. That is an insult on so many levels for those of you who haven't seen the former leader of Yulmore in the main story. Just trust me when I tell you that there's no worse insult than comparing someone to that guy. Gaia needs help, and Reen wants to help her just like you all did for her, even if it does put the mission at risk. Knowing that she feels so strongly about this, both Thancred and Urianger agree to taking Gaia to Eden and helping deal with any trouble Reen's decision causes later. Gaia, somehow thinking she's in charge, tells you to hurry up with the emotional stuff and get a move on, or she'll leave you behind, even though she needs your vehicle to get there. Back at Eden, Gaia doesn't attack you, so that's a good sign at least, but it could be because she's so lost in thought. Reen tries to talk to her, but her positive attitude doesn't do anything but make Gaia angry. Every second that passes makes her feel like the voice in her head is taking over her, and she doesn't even know if Gaia is her real name. When Thancred had asked her, she couldn't remember, but the fairy told her that it was Gaia. She couldn't ask anyone in Yulmore because everyone who knew her was either turned into a Sin Eater or disappeared. Reen tries to relate since she never knew her own real name either. She was either called the Oracle of Light or Menphilia until Thancred named her Reen, but Gaia changes the subject. The fairy hasn't reacted to her being near Eden, so maybe it would do something if you fly the thing around a bit. You still got elements to reawaken, so you all make your way back into the giant Sin Eater. Even though you have made some changes to the elements with the Sin Eater's power, the changes haven't spread. Activating the right third element might be able to jumpstart the others. Lightning is that element, which means you're gonna go up against Ramuh. Reen's excited to see him and his legendary beard since Thancred's told her all about it. Now if you remember how this works, you have to fly to an area ripe with the element that you want to awaken. Urianger suggests the Gandalf Thunder Plains, since before the flood they had been covered in a never-ending lightning storm, and the lightning ether is still very strong there. Now I'm sure you remember that your memories were used to mold the ether into a primal, and just like before, you royally mess up summoning Ramuh, giving him a nice shave and a ripped half Ixion body. So basically he looks absolutely nothing like you remember, solidifying my claims that the Warrior of Light has brain damage from all the times he's been knocked around. After overcoming the Lord of Lightning, you all head back to your camp. Although there are no visible changes to the area, Thancred can feel changes in the air. It feels like a storm is on the horizon. Gaia's not impressed by Eden's abilities, and apparently neither is her fairy because it still hasn't showed up. Making the air human isn't really a big step toward restoring the world to how it was before the flood, and Urianger believes that a more active element is needed to jumpstart the process of making it rain. There is a problem, however. You need wind ether to form the clouds, and fire ether to evaporate the water. Individually, neither will be much use, but being balanced alongside the elements you've already restored should cause it to rain. So Gaia proposes that you draw out both elements together. Now I want you to let that sink in for a moment. Drawing out an element summons a primal, and the only way to restore the ether to the land is to defeat the primal. Doing this will cause you to have to fight two primals at once. And not just any two, the gods of fire and wind. Your friends, who you've gone out of your way to save countless times, who you've laughed and cried with, eaten dinner with, and never done anything but help them, wants you to fight both Garuda and Ifrit at the same time. Rain does seem a bit preoccupied though, and piloting Eden while she's worrying about other things won't make what you're trying to do any easier. Knowing this, the girl finally tells you what's on her mind. Gaia is one of the only people her own age that she knows, and she wants to be a friend, but the girl's not the most friendly of people. She doesn't really know how to even go about making friends, and with everything going on, it's probably the dumbest thing for her to be thinking about, but it's still bothering her. Honestly, despite all of the battles that she's fought beside you in, it's important to remember that Rin is still only 16, and not even a normal 16-year-old. She's been kept secluded from the rest of the world until only recently, and while Alizé and Alphinaud are only a little older than her, the trials that they've been through don't make them count as normal teens either. Seeing Rin trying to have a normal conversation about shopping and such is kind of refreshing, although seeing the hurt look on her face when Gaia tells her that she's only sticking around to see what happens with Eden, not because they're friends, is a little heartbreaking. At least Rin tried, so now it's time for you to do the almost impossible. Urianger guides you to a place called the Ashfall, where the weather was once scorching hot during the day and extremely windy at night. The perfect place for you to do battle with two primals. Facing them both is definitely a unique challenge, especially when they perform a Dragon Ball Z style fusion complete with a new name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Despite the fact that you shouldn't have been able to, you do bring down the pair, and when you step outside, it's actually raining. There's only one last element left: ice. Despite seeing physical changes this time, Gaia seems even more depressed. Despite her being near Eden, nothing's changed for her. She still has no memories, and once this little distraction is over, she'll still have nothing. She shouts at Eden to give her back her memories, causing the voice inside of her to finally speak. It tells her to extinguish the light and awaken her true power, because it's time for her to reclaim her memories and fulfill her destiny. The voice fades without giving her any real answers, and since there's nothing you can really do about it for now, you all head back into Eden's core to plan your next move, because while bringing the rain back was great, standing in it, not so much. With ice being the final element, the plan for summoning it has to be made, but first Gaia wants to know if fixing this final element would change the world back to how it was before the flood. It will, in a few decades. Can't fix all of the damage that was done overnight. The empty has been, empty for 100 years, so it may take that long to return it to what it was. Gaia is shocked that you're working so hard to fix a world that you may not even live long enough to see, while all she's been worrying about is herself. She's always listened to the voice in her head, scared of what would happen if she disobeyed it, but she doesn't want to do that anymore. Because if Rin's destined to fix the world, and Gaia's supposed to be her opposite, then that means she's there to destroy it. She starts to think that was the reason that everyone abandoned her, and the reason why, eventually, all of you will too. It's why she's been keeping you all at arm's length, evading Rin's attempts at friendship, because in the end she knows she's a monster meant to bring misery and death to everyone. An intense pain overcomes her for a moment, and she steps outside for some air. She says she's fine, but Rin's worried. Thancred sends you to check on her, just in case there's a repeat of what happened before and she accidentally summons a horde of void scent. Outside, the darkness that filled Gaia bursts out of her, forming a strange crystal, and a swarm of Sin Eaters appear, drawn by the power of the creature that Gaia had called her fairy. It attacks her as you arrive, but she fends it off, and you bring her back inside as the fairy sends its Sin Eater horde at you. Urianger goes to tend the now unconscious Gaia while you do what you do best and face off against the fairy and its Sin Eaters. You best the creature, but Gaia still doesn't wake up. Her mind floats alone in a dark void without even the voice of the fairy to keep her company. She shouts, but no one seems to be able to hear her. Even worse, her memories still haven't come back. Reluctantly, she accepts her fate, hoping that death will at least give her peace, but Rin's voice cuts through the darkness and wakes her up. Although she won't admit it, she was surprisingly happy to hear the girl. She does apologize for interrupting what you were doing with her little issue, and while she's feeling better, something about the incident is bothering her. That was the first time the fairy's words had put memories into her mind, memories of stuff that she doesn't understand, memories of things that someone else saw. Urianger believes that since you brought back darkness to the first, that may have woken up a bit of Zodiark's power on this shard. Like Menphilia could hear the voice of Hydaelyn because of her status as the Oracle of Light, Gaia may be hearing the voice of a bit of Zodiac that still exists here, but being touched by his power doesn't mean Gaia has to obey it, so Reen's not worried. There will be plenty of time to ponder her situation after the final element is restored. The time has come to deal with Shiva. Shiva wasn't summoned the same as the other primals. Isel, a woman who fought both against and alongside you, used the Echo to transform herself into Shiva. The fact that she could control it herself intrigues Reen as you all head to the Great Glacier in the northernmost part of the Empty. When you arrive, Reen decides that she wants to be the vessel for Shiva. Since ice is the element most aligned with light, using her abilities combined with Eden's should let her do it. While Urianger doesn't agree with the idea, it definitely has its benefits. Isel was a powerful ally who could become a primal at will. Reen learning to do it would be very useful, except for a very important fact that Thancred seems to be the only one to remember. When primals get summoned, you stick pointy things in them. And Thancred has no intention of watching you and Reen try to kill each other. Not to mention the ether only returns to the land when the primal dies, so if Reen becomes a primal, you would have to kill her to restore the ether to the first. Of course, there may be other ways, but to Thancred, they don't seem worth the risk. Reen believes she can control it and disperse the ether safely, but if it takes control of her, then you won't be able to hold back in the battle that'll follow, or she'll kill you. Still, she wants to try, because Eden seems to have infinite power, and while it's listening to her for now, what happens when it stops? It could undo everything that you've done, but if she can train it to absorb and disperse ether safely, then she can let it restore the rest of the Empty on its own without having to worry about it starting to feed on the ether like other Sin Eaters, and end up destroying the world. Reluctantly, Thancred agrees, and Reen transforms into Shiva.
I call upon the power of Shiva.
The ether immediately overwhelms her, who really didn't see that coming, and one of the most epic battles ever begins. As you fight, light ether explodes out of Reen, freezing you solid. Luckily, Gaia jumps in and summons Mjolnir to break you free of the ice prison, and she uses her power to contain the flood of ice that started to burst out of Reen while you knocked the girl out. On a side note, this was one of my favorite parts of this story because of one thing. You lost. The Warrior of Light was done in by Ice Empress Reen, and the only reason you survived is because somebody else jumped into the fight to help you. That's probably the only reason that I like the character of Xenos. He's a stereotypical villain where he's just bad because. But in a fight, he's somebody who can overpower the Warrior of Light. And after all of the things that you've been seen doing up through Stormblood, it's refreshing to see you finally fight somebody who you can't just dominate. In any case, once Reen wakes up, the power of Shiva has left her, all aside from a small piece of ice that Gaia thinks will make a nice necklace. Thancred looks on as the two girls finally laugh and talk as friends. Together you all step outside to see what your efforts have accomplished, only to see that grass has begun to grow all around your camp. With your task done for now, and a new friend made, you all leave the Empty for a much needed rest, and to tell the rest of your team what you've accomplished so far. Now that the Scions are back on the Source, you take a trip to the First to check on Reen, Gaia, and the Empty. Ironically enough, you arrive right when Yalfred and the others are planning another trip into the Empty. But before you set off, he lets Gaia know that they've been making progress with finding out about her past, but she's not as happy about it as you might think. She's actually enjoying hanging out with Reen, and learning about her past may ruin that. Plus, she's more interested in learning about her odd powers and the weird voice in her head than whatever she used to be in Yulmore. So the three of you head off to the Empty, where Gaia surprises you all by revealing that she's learned to drive the Sky Slipper so she can chauffeur you two around. On the ride, Reen catches you up on what they've been doing while you were away. They finally got their coffee biscuits, which are delicious, and they made a necklace out of the piece of ice that came from the time Reen turned into Shiva and tried to kill you. And there's even a festival that the kids at the Crystarium are setting up to help the adults take their minds off of the stress of readjusting to the new changes you brought to the first by restoring darkness. It's very reminiscent of the garden festival that Sophie put on Final Fantasy VIII. The ride is pleasant, but once you arrive in the empty, Reen is horrified to see that the plants that were growing in the area when you left have started to die. The strange crystal that none of you actually know what it does aside from changing color every time you restore an element seems to be taken over by light ether. Gaia thinks that when Reen had lost control of the ether during her attempt to control Shiva's powers, she had unbalanced the elements despite Gaia holding back the darkness. The voice of the fairy returns to Gaia suddenly, screaming at her to restore the darkness before it's too late. The words give her an idea. With the light ether overflowing, channeling dark ether should be able to balance it. Of course, that means you'll have to pummel the primal that gets summoned. Again. There's just one small problem. There are no dark primals. Reen thinks about the Ascians god Zodiark, but it'll be better to summon something that you know wouldn't one-shot you, and nothing said that what you summon has to be a primal. It just has to be filled with dark ether, kinda like a void scent. And you fought a few of those that fit the criteria, but none would be better than the Cloud of Darkness. By combining the powers of the Oracle of Light and Darkness, the pair should be able to summon the Cloud of Darkness without you having to fly Eden anywhere, although Gaia is pretty sure something's gonna go wrong. However, Reen tries to cheer her up by talking about all the snacks that they'll have at the festival that, for some reason, Gaia has no idea about, despite the fact that you all talked about it on the way there. And chalking it up to the fact that she was trying not to crash you into anything on the ride over there, the two kids get to work on summoning the Cloud of Darkness. Once again, you focus your thoughts and use your memories to summon the cloud, and she looks even less like the original than your other attempts. Kinda want to know what goes through the Warrior of Light's mind when people tell him to, think. This version is 1,000 times more brutal than the one you fought at the Crystal Tower, but after being blown up, dropped off a cliff, and battered in unbelievable ways, you bring it down and you all head outside to see if your hard work paid off. The plants are still dead, but the weird crystal finally seems stable, but Gaia feels like something's wrong. Very, very wrong. The voice of the fairy returns, claiming that it's been waiting 100 years for this moment, prompting Gaia to realize that it's been hiding inside of Eden all of this time. The sky ripples and you finally see what, or who, has been talking to Gaia her entire life. An Ascian named Mitron. Your actions have freed him from his prison of light, and with a shocking bit of deductive reasoning that would have made Urianger proud, Reen figures out that Mitron wasn't hiding inside of Eden, but he is Eden. Eden is an Ascian that was transformed into a Sin Eater. Gaia is a little bit upset to learn that restoring the darkness was Matron's idea and not hers, but he hadn't forced her to do anything. He'd only suggested it, and she'd gone through with it on her own, giving him the ability to leave the body he'd been trapped in for a century. And he's thankful to Gaia for her help, although he knew she'd come for him. He knows her very well, and once he restores her memories, she'll know him too. When the 13th shard was flooded with darkness, the first, being the world most connected to it, felt the effects the most. It was unbalanced in a way that made it easily overcome by light ether. If that happened, it would become as useless to the Ascians as the 13th, so they put extra effort into keeping the world from being flooded with light. Emmett Selk came up with a plan to jumpstart the rejoining of all the shards with the source by using the light that the Ascians had worked to keep back, and he had given the job to Matron and his allies. But they were beaten by Ardbert and his friends. Death isn't permanent for Ascians in most cases. Their souls just go back into the rift until they find a new body. But before Matron's soul could leave, Ardbert stabbed it with a sword made of pure light, and it mutated him into Eden. The pain was unbearable, and then he couldn't even think anymore. His instincts took over, and they latched on to Ardbert's desire to banish darkness, causing him to unleash the full force of the light built up inside of him. It would have consumed the entire world had Menphilia not stopped the flood. Her actions gave Matron a bit of his consciousness back, but he couldn't move. He could only whisper and hope someone could hear him. Emmett Selk could have saved him, but he wouldn't risk disturbing the balance of ether. So Matron called out to the only person who he knew would help him, Gaia. The voice she had been hearing her entire life had been pleading for help, but since she had forgotten him and everything about who she was, she didn't know. And without that knowledge, she could only use a fraction of her power. When you restored darkness to the world, it made Matron stronger and let him take more direct control of Gaia, which is what had brought her to Eden. He had brought her there to free him, but you stopped it when you had fought her. But your attempts to fix the empty by having Eden absorb ether slowly helped him break free, and now he's able to project his mind outside of Eden, although he's still trapped inside. The story is interesting, but Gaia still doesn't understand what it means about her. Matron decides to show her once she goes back to Eden's core. Reen's reluctant to do anything that the fairy told Gaia, and now knowing that it's an Ascian, she's even less likely to trust it. On top of that, she no longer has control of Eden, so going into the core could be terrible, but she doesn't know what to do. As long as Matron is absorbing all the ether you gathered, the empty will never be restored. She wishes Thancred and Urianger were there, but in a shocking turn of events, Gaia no longer has any idea who they are. It seems that Matron is stealing her memories, meaning that if you want to help Gaia, you'll have to deal with him. So you head to the core where he decides to use Eden to recreate the events of 100 years ago, to show you what happened when Arbor and the others faced off against the Shadowkeeper, kinda similar to the way Emmett Selk recreated Amarok. All of this is so he can show Gaia who she really is, but Reen warns her not to trust anything he says. When Gaia decides to listen to you instead of him, he snaps, yelling at Reen for corrupting his friend before he decides to teleport Gaia away to start restoring her to her true self. And he's going to make you help by forcing you to face off against the Shadowkeeper, the beast that Arbor and his warriors of darkness fought 100 years ago. Like they did before, you bring down the monster, and after the fight, Matron gives Gaia back, but something's wrong with her. The memories of her past start coming back, and she remembers seeing the warriors of light and the Shadowkeeper, but it's all still fuzzy. Matron reappears to fill in the blanks for her. The reason she remembered the battle was because 100 years ago, she and Matron had combined their powers to create the beast. The reason Reen had thought Gaia felt like Emmett Selk when they had first met was because the woman was an Ascian reborn. She and Matron had merged bodies and souls to fight the warriors of light, but when Arbor had struck them down, Gaia had died, allowing her to be reborn, while Matron had been turned into Eden. She got to live on without him, but now that they're back together, he won't let her be taken away from him again. Reen tries to empathize with him. Having been held against her will herself, she can understand how trapped and helpless he must feel, but that doesn't give him the right to steal Gaia's memories. But having known true happiness with Gaia, Matron can't handle the fact that fate tore them apart. He decides that he will merge with her again, restoring her memories all at once. He begins the process and Gaia's Ascian mask appears, revealing that he has been telling the truth the entire time. As her other memories start to return faster, she looks at Reen and has no idea who the girl is. With her mind cleared of all the distracting memories of her human side, Matron finally rejoins with her. The sight of their merged form activates the echo, and you're taken to an image of Matron and Gaia in her true form as Logrith. Her memory was distorted even then because after rebirth it takes time, and a little coaxing, for Ascians to remember who they were. Matron tells her that they were members of the Convocation of 14 who worked alongside him itself, La Habrea, and the other top Ascians to summon Zodiark. Originally, Gaia was supposed to act as Zodiark's heart, but the job eventually went to Elidibus. And despite everything that happened and all of the trials that they had faced, Matron had stayed by Gaia's side trying to protect her. But he couldn't stop Hydaelyn from shattering the world, or Gaia. Emmett Selk had restored her memories so she could help them restore the world to what it had been before Hydaelyn dropkicked Zodiark and shattered everything. But she and Matron only had the true power to help when they joined together. And Gaia was okay with that, because she cared for Matron as much as he cared for her. She makes him promise that they'll never be separated again, and he vows that even if fate tears them apart, he will find her, and when he calls out to her, she swears that she'll always come running. When the vision ends, Matron reveals that he and Gaia were always destined to be together, but he didn't have the power to restore sundered souls to their rightful place like Emmett Selk could without merging with them. With the process complete, Gaia restored to her place as Logrith. With that done, they can move forward with restoring the world to what it had once been, and carving out their own utopia where they could spend eternity together. Reen doesn't care about anything he said. She just wants her friend back, which seems a bit selfish. Yes, she and Gaia became best friends, but ignoring the fact that Gaia and Matron have generations of history together all because you want somebody to hang out with is kind of childish, especially after the Echo revealed that Matron has been telling the truth. She goes so far as to call his plan to get Gaia back a wicked scheme, as if the two of them hadn't promised to fight for each other centuries before. So Matron, refusing to allow servants of Heidelin to tear him and Gaia apart again, draws Reen's greatest fears out and makes them manifest, forcing you to fight what has to be the coolest looking version of Thancred ever, the Fate Breaker. When you overcome the monstrosity, Matron can't believe that you, a fragmented soul, was able to overcome the manifestation of your fears when they, the unsundered Ascians, couldn't. Clearly he doesn't know what you are, but he has been out of the loop for a while, so it's understandable. While he's distracted by his thoughts, the moral side of Gaia begins to rebel against her Ascian half, so Matron begins purging the memories brought on by her time with the Servants of Light. Then, to make sure you cause no further problems, he decides to kill you so he can get back to his important work. Matron begins to absorb large amounts of ether, so much so that if you don't stop him, the entirety of the First will be destroyed, and then the battle begins. You face off against the combined form of Matron and Gaia, just like Arbor had done in the past, but this time when you win, both of their souls are sent into the rift. In the void, the pair talk, but where Gaia had died the last time, this time Matron dies and is free to be reborn, something that Gaia believes he should be happy with since it means fate can bring them together again in another life. But it may be her that finds him the next time. It sounds good, but he doesn't even think she'll remember him for long. However, she's decided to keep a diary so that even if her memories fade, her words won't, and she'll make sure that generations to come know the tale of the girl bound by duty and her loyal protector who fought by her side through it all. A story that is nearly identical to the story of Thancred and Memphilia, although Gaia has a bit more to offer than telling you to return to the Wakened Sands. With a smile on his face, Matron fades off to be reborn some other time, leaving Gaia alone in the void until Reen reaches out through the necklace they'd made and pulls her back to the First. When her soul returns to her body, the ether that had been stored and eaten bursts out, restoring the empty to a place better described as a utopia. Reen wishes the others could see what they've done, and since Gaia's an Ascian, she may be able to learn to travel to other worlds so she could tell Thancred and the others all about it. But until then, the kids have other things to do, like preparing for their festival. This concludes the story of Eden. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video.